The leaders of South Korea, the U.S. and Japan are poised to sit down for the third time, this time in the Japanese city of Hiroshima. Heading up their talks will be an extension to what was discussed last time in Phnom Penh, where they agreed to share real-time North Korean missile information. For more, let's turn to Professor Bryan Myers from Dongseo University. Good morning, Professor.
Good morning.
First off, it's widely believed among many experts that beefing up trilateral coordination against North Korea is essential and crucial. Now, why is that, Professor? Why is such trilateral cooperation inevitable at this time?
Well, it's always been desirable, but the quicker North Korea can launch a nuclear weapon by using solid-fueled missiles, for example, the more important it becomes for Japan, the United States, and South Korea to share warning information as fast as possible. And just over the past few months, we've seen both Seoul and Tokyo take a little too much time to ascertain the exact nature of North Korean missile launches, like the Hwasong-18 last month, for example. And that's a big problem. Now, obviously, everything has to go through the Americans because the South Koreans and Japanese are not allies. But if this planned radar sharing system goes into operation, the three countries will effectively be sharing information instantaneously via the American command in Hawaii. And I think a well-functioning trilateral relationship would go a long way toward disabusing North Korea of its hope of somehow luring South Korea out of the American camp. And that's a hope which Pyongyang has never really given up. But I think for a trilateral relationship to work, it would have to be able to survive political changes here in South Korea. The problem has been really since the 1950s that Seoul's readiness to work with Japan has varied dramatically depending on who's in power here. And these mood swings here every 5 years, if I can call them that, militate against a healthy trilateral relationship.
I see. Now, according to Japanese media outlets, then, Seoul and Tokyo are nearing agreement on connecting their radar through a U.S. system to share real-time North Korean missile information. The question is, how much of that information sharing do you think the two sides will be able to agree to share this time?
Yeah, I guess we'll find out more during the defense ministers' meeting in Singapore next month, but I think they'll agree to share quite a lot. We've been hearing for a long time, the South Korean public won't accept close military cooperation with Japan. But the reaction to President Yoon's improvement of relations with Tokyo has generally been one of benign indifference, judging from the resurgence of South Korean consumer interest in buying Japan. The No Japan boycott of 2019 seems to be ancient history already.
Right.
So I think that as long as the Yoon government is in power, South Korea will want to share missile warning information virtually unconditionally with the Japanese. The question for me is whether Tokyo will want to do more than the bare minimum with Seoul. I mean, Yoon's successor could very well revert to Korean nationalism and revive Japanese fears of clandestine inter-Korean cooperation. And let's remember, those fears were what actuated Japan's removal of South Korea from its export whitelist 4 years ago. So I don't think we'll see trilateral information sharing reach its full potential until the Japanese are confident that it's sustainable across different South Korean administrations.
Right. We do have the defense ministers meeting coming up next month, so let's keep an eye on that as well. But we also have to talk about the concerns that the three sides may share different understanding when it comes to sharing real-time North Korean missile warning info. For instance, the missile sharing movement could be interpreted as joining the U.S.-led missile defense system, MD, especially to countries like China. Now, Professor Myers, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I think there is a very high likelihood that missile sharing would indeed be, the information sharing would indeed be interpreted in that way, in which case the Chinese would doubtless accuse South Korea of violating the famous 3 no's, which Moon Jae-in delivered to Xi Jinping 6 years ago. One of those 3 no's was the promise not to participate in the Americans' missile defense network. Now, of course, as the Yoon government sees it, all this radar sharing would be purely aimed at nullifying the North Korean threat. But that's how South Korea also tried to justify installing the THAAD anti-missile system, and we all remember how angry the Chinese were about that. So if the South Koreans do want to go ahead with this, they should maybe brace themselves for some unpleasant rhetoric, not just from Beijing, but from Moscow too, which has always said that the Americans' Aegis missile defense system, with which Japanese ships are also equipped, is not all about the North Korean threat like the Americans say it is.
Right. It is indeed quite an uncomfortable and unpleasant situation for South Korea. Then what stance should Seoul take when cooperating with the U.S. and Japan, especially when it comes to countering North Korean provocations and dealing with North Korean issues, Professor?
Well, I think it should be a stable stance, to put things as simply as possible. South Korea changes its foreign policies and its policy to North Korea a little too drastically from one administration to the next. The last South Korean president seemed to abandon prior agreements made with Tokyo dating all the way back to the 1960s. And of course, President Yoon doesn't consider himself bound by Moon Jae-in's 3 no's, which admittedly were not a formal treaty, but still. I don't think you can find another liberal democracy in the world whose relations with neighboring states change so much depending on which party is in power. And this unpredictability, I think, diminishes trust in South Korea and nurtures the North Koreans' hope, which I've already referred to, of someday breaking apart the South Korean alliance with the US. So I think it's necessary for the 2 main parties in Seoul to refrain from foreign policy and military initiatives that do not enjoy bipartisan support, so that more continuity can be maintained, because that continuity is absolutely vital to South Korea's standing in the international community.
Right, and also when it comes to dealing with Korean Peninsula issues, it is vital. It will remain vital.
I agree.
All right. Thank you, Professor, for your time this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you.